AI is transforming applications, but with innovation comes new risks. Enter Noma, the first application security platform built to secure the entire data and AI lifecycle. From your AI supply chain to models and runtime, Noma protects it all. With a single platform that integrates seamlessly across your data pipelines, Jupyter Notebooks, ML Ops tools, code, and application SDKs, Noma delivers full lifecycle visibility, security, and compliance. Start securing your data and AI lifecycle at securityweekly.com/Noma. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Sandy Carielli and Akira Brand about the simple ways to make threat modeling successful and why it's more helpful to talk about features than controls. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with Kalyani Pawar and Akira Brand has stuck around to chat with some news. Akira, Kalyani, there's some fun news that came up this past week. I pulled in a couple articles that, to me, spoke to more about security design considerations, both in the sense of design that succeeded and some design that failed. And I thought that would be a great tie-in to the conversation we just had about threat modeling. But first, because everybody is talking about it, there was, of course, that great upheaval in the AI world last week where a dose of real innovation dropped into an artificial market. I wanted to tease this a little bit by saying in AppSec terms, I saw this more as an influencer injection attack, where there are a lot of strongly held options and opinions, were put forward based on superficial extrapolations from headlines that repeated many misleading claims. So this is my lobbying to get influencer injection into the OAuth LLM top 10 list. But of course, I'm referring to DeepSeek, and the only thing that I found AppSec related or even interesting about it was that Wiz went and did, like any bug bounty researcher out there, just started scanning. So this is a bit of a callback to what we were talking about last segment, and the point about how expensive a bug bounty could be. But Wiz found Port 9000. They found a ClickHouse database, that was open to the world and basically could lead to massive amounts of sensitive data leak, potentially system compromise, or getting further into a network from pivoting throughout the network. So again, a lot of familiar things. I'm not sure if there's anything else that we really want to go into this other than just pointing out and reiterating what Wiz says at the end, that if you're dealing with AI, it's kind of like every other software out there, the sense that the immediate risks come from infrastructure and the tools supporting them. So Kalyani, anything you'd throw onto this DeepSeek saga?
I wanted to say that we're not going out of jobs as application security engineers because clearly
Fair point.
If had this thing been threat modeled and then vetted thoroughly before it went onto a whole public forum, I mean, this wouldn't have happened. So yeah, my job's not going anywhere. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah. It's software. It's software being put on the cloud. It's software being connected with an API. It just happens to be an AI, but it does feel it's just reinventing many of the basics, which could perhaps be found through good threat modeling discussions. I did mention the OAuth top 10 for LLMs, and I have a particular love-hate relationship with top 10 lists. And Kalyani, you brought in another one for me. So I'll let you introduce this. Then we have to have some discussions about this. What did you find for us?
So OAuth Top 10 has come up with a new list for the NHI non-human identities. Do we need something for the non-human identities? Maybe as a primer and an introductory learn, these are all the things that are wrong with non-human identities. But more so, it also feels like an extension of the already existing OAuth top 10s to me. Yeah, for example, say offboarding felt like, well, there's something really legacy that exists in your infrastructure already, or that you can always see, you can map it to some of the already existing controls on the list.
Speaking of that made me think. Let's put you and Akira on the spot for a quick OWASP top 10 pop quiz. So you're good sports. This is a friendly pop quiz, and you haven't really been given any chance to prep for it. So listeners, go don't judge them. But in the spirit of what you're just saying, Kalyani, I want to go through. Let's start with Akira. Sorry, I'm going to make you go first since you were a former co-host.
Be gentle
I'm
on
going to
me.
I'm going to list an OAuth top 10 entry, and I just need you to tell me what list and what year that's from. So, broken authentication and session management.
Broken authentication and session management. That's the OAuth top 10, and I want to say, is it from 2021?
Sorry, I was thinking 2004. Kalyani, broken authentication and session management. What's that from?
You just said that to me, didn't you?
There's another entry.
Oh,
Um,
dang.
Got to have the list and the year.
shit, I want to say 2017.
Sorry, I was thinking of the one from the OAuth Top 10 2010. Akira, back to you. How about broken user authentication? I need a list name and a year.
Broken user authentication?
That's going to be the API Top 10 from 2019. Okay, not doing so well. Kalyani, we at least need to get somebody one thing right here. Let's try improper authentication and authorization. I'll give you a hint for this one. The and uses an ampersand in this entry.
I want to say OWASP top 10. I'm gonna
No,
say,
sorry, that was the Cloud Native Application Security Top 10 from 2021.
I didn't even
Akira, we'll give you one
existed.
more.
I'm going to open up ChatGPT to
We're
figure
going to give you
this
one
out.
more, Akira, just to stop the bleeding here. How about
Thanks.
broken authentication and session management? And again, here's a hint: the and here uses an ampersand instead of the word and.
I'm going to say the OWASP top 10 for stumping Akira 2025.
Close. That was the Desktop Applications Top 10 from 2021. And just to be fair, Kalyani, last one: insecure authentication.
I'll go with the APIs.
Sorry, that was the Non-Human Identities 2025. So perhaps we do need that list. And I think as the reaction points out, perhaps there is a bit of repetition and some focus that could be brought here about do we need all the lists, or what are the lists providing either us as application security industry folks, or if we're giving them to developers, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think that is sort of the rhetorical question. I'll leave us here. But since I put you both through that, Akira, Kalyani, I'll give you some any last words you want to on the either the NHI top 10 or what we just went through there.
Yeah, I mean, that was terrible, but I have some I have some thoughts on the NHI. I mean, a lot of this NHI, I've looked at it for a total of 20 seconds. But it looks like a lot of it could come down to session management, right? Which is important. But I don't know that the exploits themselves are going to be much different than any other OWASP list.
And it does, to your point, to me too. I will point out that the NHI top 10 is very well written. I like the writing of it more than some of the others, just as a personal preference. But it does read very much like, offboarding, as Kalyani pointed out from the very beginning, in the sense of here's some policy considerations, or here's a process or a life cycle of identity to work through. So this is good to have, but I think the angle that I would come through for this is what's actionable, that is something that you have created within your application to enforce these types of policies, versus this is the checklist to follow and just say, did you do this? Did you do this? And it's that idea of how can we turn these top 10 lists or whatever into a secure design or secure defaults? And I'm going to broaden this into an article I pulled out about the RFC 9700, the best current practice for OAuth 2.0 security. So in a way, you could consider this RFC kind of like a top 10 list. It's not a list of just 10 things, but is pointing out that there's a lot of OAuth 2.0 implementations out there that are not necessarily interoperable because the actual spec itself has a lot of options to implement. So the design has a lot of extensions that could be done. And there's some mistakes that people can make on whether they're handling or how they're handling redirects. Were headers included? Were headers not included? How can tokens be replayed? What are the attacker threat models that need to be updated, which is what the RFC actually explicitly calls out as well, how to update the threat models for OAuth. So this is a really good example, I think, of a document that says we had a design of OAuth 2.0. The design itself was not just one RFC, it's actually a whole bunch of them, and an alphabet soup. And how do we do better? So OAuth v 2.1 will be coming out hopefully this year that will make interoperability better. Not my pronunciation, of course, but I think, and I'm sorry, I'm losing some my train of thought here. But the point is, there's an updated attacker model specifically in this RFC, great callback to threat modeling, and it walks through some attacks and mitigations that are and countermeasures that do look like they could be actionable. So those were some of the takeaways. It looks like it was describing we need to update what we're concerned about, and we need to take better action. And that's why I'd love to see about a top 10 list in general. But I don't know. Help me out here, Kalyani. I know I was not doing a great job in the last segment about asking clear questions. Have I lost you, or what? Bring us back to earth here and some sane AppSec discussions.
I think, when we're talking about something like OAuth, for example, it's again like a security feature, and it almost makes me feel like shouldn't we have had RFCs on this since day one? And like, why am I seeing it right now, like suddenly? And it probably points in the direction of, hey, we're at least moving in a positive energy towards AppSec, and now we're all starting to take it more seriously. So, yeah.
Yeah, and very much to support your point, I'll quote a bit from this RFC 9700. Section 4 is a really good section. I'd encourage people to go read. And it talks about the insufficient redirection URI validation. So right there, that does sound like it could be a top 10 list type of entry. But it points out that this approach, this validating redirects and URIs, turned out to be more complex to implement and more error-prone to manage than exact URI matching. And I think that, Kalyani, that speaks very much to what you just said about, why are we here? Why wasn't the design right in the first place? Why wasn't it just secure from the start? It can be from specs are either ambiguous or the specs were too generous about what you could do rather than being more opinionated about just do an exact URI match, which has some UX implications to it or impacts. So a lot of times the developers working on these OAuth 2.0 stacks are trying to balance usability, getting users just to authenticate so they can start to use a system rather than having very strict security on it. And another point that this calls out is that OAuth has definitely turned into a broader and more complex use case than it was originally intended for. And so that brings in then a lot more scrutiny and a lot more areas of ambiguity in the original design that do need to be enumerated. You mentioned Kalyani, and here I'm going to take a breath and do a redirect into another RFC or group of RFCs, because I loved how you described that as, why didn't we get this right from the beginning? And I'm framing that as a general AppSec industry rhetorical question. So there's an article from Feisty Duck, which I always enjoy reading about all things TLS, about the slow death of OCSP. And it's a wonderful article because it talks a little bit of the history of OCSP, dating all the way back to 1999. And, one of the first RFCs describing we need something other than CRLs because CRLs weren't scaling. We've got too many certs out there. They're too slow. So let's do something different. But lo and behold, it was slow to adopt. Implementations were actually insecure in the sense that you could have a soft fail or that would fail open. And it's time to just say this security design that was intended to help users and their browsers know that a certificate has been revoked just never really helped anyone. And I don't know if either of you have actually ever come across an attack where either a certificate was compromised or you saw in your browser that, hey, this certificate has been revoked. It's something I've never seen personally. So it kind of reinforces was OCSP fixing the right problem?
More than fixing the right problem, I wanted to say that there are contributing factors to it, right? Like there is much a broader competition to it, and then there's also I struggle to understand even like the training documentation. for this. And so I do see where this is coming from.
It's interesting, hearkening all the way back to our earlier conversation about threat modeling. Let's Encrypt announced that it's going to stop supporting this, right? And that points to a question that we didn't cover that we should cover at some point, which is how do you know when your threat model isn't working and you need to just abandon it?
Yes, a wonderful question because, yeah, we did talk about it does need to be updated, but as you point out, we didn't talk about when to be updated. And very clearly, this article is all about actually not even just abandoning the threat model, but abandoning this very specifically a security feature because it wasn't helping. And I think my short answer to your question there, Akira, which is what this article calls out, is that it's that idea of the soft fail, that you have a OCSP, that if there was a network connectivity problem and there was no response from the server, it would say, okay, I don't think this certificate has been revoked. I'm just going to let you go and connect to that HTTPS site, even if the certificate has actually been revoked. And it points out there's also problems here around spoofing, and there's problems with captive portals using Wi-Fi that just break what OCSP was trying to do. So it's sort of that point of, oh, our tool just wasn't helping users, and the threat model ideally should call that out. What this article also notes is that there were some RFC extensions to try and say, oh, here's how to help with the spoofing, here's how to make it more privacy friendly. But it also boiled down to that story of the developers, aka the browser vendors, kind of were like, we're not going to bother with this. The RFC first was discussed, came out in 1999. IE didn't even get it developed until 2006. About 2 years later, Firefox and Chrome had it. 2011, Apple had it. But then 2012, Chrome got rid of it. So already, if your developers just aren't feeling the love for your security design, probably a good reason to drop it. So yeah. And I think the only thing I guess I would add to this is kind of that question, rhetorical again, that's going to be my theme of the episode, is something like DNSSEC next? Because I know there's a lot of strong opinions on whether or not DNSSEC is serving security or delivering security of what in a useful way, given the trade-offs of using it.
Mm-hmm. I've heard a term called security theater before.
Oh, you should have listened. Yeah. I did a whole little bit security theater bit in my last week's intro. But yeah, it's jumping on that. Tell us how you've seen security theater. Sorry to jump in on you there.
No, that's okay. I just think that could be one of the main arguments against something like what we were just talking about is like, it's a check mark on an audit thing. It doesn't do anything except make the auditors happy. I'm not saying that this past topic was because of auditing, but anyway, it just reminded me of that. Not much more than just a little comment.
Yeah, and I think that a clearer example, what I would call out of security theater, is warning people not to use that public Wi-Fi is always dangerous because there are some unspoken or mythological types of attacks that could get after you, which completely ignores the threat modeling idea and discussion that browsers and things like iOS and Android force upgrade to HTTPS connections. So you can still have secure communications over an insecure network. So use public Wi-Fi. It's not going to be the end of the world. And maybe someday we'll have a discussion about personal VPNs and all of the misleading claims that they make, but not today because we have a lot more articles to get through. There was another fun one here. I'm going to go into talking about more design, and we'll have a threat model angle of some work from predictors.fail, so wonderful domain name. And this is talking about slap and flop, which sound like they could be cool maybe Pokemon names, or now that the D&D new monster manual is out for the 2024 edition, maybe it could be some fun, something like a mimic in there. But I digress. What I thought this was really cool is that this is a team research lab out of Georgia Institute of Technology. They did eye leakage back in 2023 that we covered, that were basically looking at what are Apple CPUs doing. And in this case, they've updated their research to say, okay, Spectre was looking at control flow attacks, branch prediction, things like that that could leak information from a CPU, rather than looking at the control flow of a CPU, they're looking at the data flow in the sense of the CPU is saying, oh, I'm going to preload some data or an address or a value that I think this application is going to need. Hopefully I got it right so that it's more performant, et cetera, et cetera. But what they've discovered and what they demonstrated through some neat JavaScript and WebAssembly is that you can prime the CPUs to get ready to load some sensitive data that you don't have any access to, that then you can infer what that sensitive data is. And they demonstrated things like reading email, reading credit card numbers in a browser. So really cool research. And one other thing I wanted to highlight, really well-written website in the sense of it's not full of hyperbole, it's full of very clear explanations of what the problems are. So this one just really personally spoke to me as fun research, not earth-shattering research in the sense that everybody should stop using the internet and the web browsers right now, but really cool because it's introducing a new attack class that Apple is working on. So I don't know, Kalyani, if you get excited about these same types of hardware geekery that I do, but if there's something here that grabbed you.
I feel like I'm so far away from this hardware world right now that I'm only amused at everything I hear.
Wait, okay, so they would infer what kind of data they were going to get, and then people, I'm a little lost, right? So, and then folks could inject data into these sort of inferred.
No, kind of just the opposite. So
Okay.
what the idea is that clearly this needs call it a shared computing environment or a shared environment with your browser, for example, has one domain open, one web page open, another web page open. How do you break that same origin policy, if you will, or the sandboxing of the processes between those two tabs? So that if I have my email open in one, as they demonstrate with Proton Mail's inbox, and another web page open that has the attack code, how can the attacker infer what one of your messages is? And so it's the idea that it's using this slap or flop data flow prediction and failures in that prediction to say, oh, we can infer that this was a value of, here's some text. And the paper does go into some details about some limitations of, 255 bytes about, how much data they could get at once. But it has some neat discussions of some techniques to get around that. So I mostly wanted to highlight this idea, this sense of a callback to threat modeling about how does this affect us personally. Right now, it's not an end of the world. And, in shared computing environments, I don't think a lot of Macs are being used in, cloud like all of our cloud service providers, but they are there in things like the private cloud and the privacy-friendly cloud that Apple has created. So lots of cool things. Let's move on to the next topic, though, because there is some other stuff that still left. Kalyani, I've been diving into that hardware, but you, on the other hand, were looking at some, is it old school or is it some new school, PHP type of vulns?
I feel, more than old school and new school, I wanted to talk about like how dreadful this is.
Oh, dear.
Basically, what is happening here is that there's a flaw with PHP Voyager's file management system, which can lead to remote code execution. What particularly stood out to me, and the CVEs are really interesting to read, but what particularly stood out to me was that how vulnerable disclosure programs work, right? Like all of this was reported back in September, and it's been well over 90 days. And it should have been fixed, but it is not. And so now it is the responsibility of the user to make sure that they're not, not exposing themselves. And so, yeah, it's just, we have all these amazing, we've had such good bug bounty conversations through the whole day. But bug bounty is only 100% effective if the reported things are fixed.
Yeah, and it does. There's always that bit of frustration that we're in 2025 now, and there's still hiccups, I guess, to use a neutral-ish word, around this vulnerability disclosure process in the sense of just trying to figure out who do I disclose to, And then examples of, well, is this even a vulnerability that needs to be fixed? And in this case that you highlighted, when is this going to get fixed? And so, here is a researcher that says 90 days have passed. That's kind of what Project Zero sticks to very strictly. Let's just reveal it. And so now there's a lot of users out there, which sadly to me, if you click on a malicious link, it's basically that malicious link could execute arbitrary code on the server. So once again, we do fall into that trap of what I really don't like about phishing training, in the sense of links are bad. Don't click on links, even though links are designed to be good. Here's one example where, you could click on a bad link and you've got an RCE. Obviously, I still would point out that this should be something like you're fixing, you have mitigations, you're interacting with it in a more secure manner, but things are tough. I guess this is just reinforces your point, Kalyani. We'll have job security for quite a while.
I'm actually looking at the Git repository for Voyager, and I am seeking a security document, and I don't see one, which is interesting. So I wonder what the process is for reporting security vulnerabilities to packages like Voyager. And my question for you, Kalyani, is Voyager open source?
I think it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that could lead us into a whole discussion on open source security, right? Like, who's responsible for these security bugs? Is anyone actually responsible for them because it's open source and it's not necessarily guaranteed by a enterprise? And how do open source packages manage security vulnerabilities in a way where it's responsible, but also not burdensome on the maintainers? That's a whole different conversation for a whole different.
And I think in this case, I think, I would come down more forcefully on the idea that there's still a responsibility from the package maintainers to deal with security, to at least be the point of contact, to understand here's a security issue. That does not mean that they are responsible for immediately figuring out this is, we're going to patch this tomorrow, we're going to drop everything. There is that conversation of, is this impactful? Because we've seen in the past some researchers or bug bounty reports against libcurl where they were just written by an LLM and were completely off the wall. Not even there was no risk there at all. But it puts that pressure on the repository maintainer, the project maintainer, to figure out there's nothing here. There's not even smoke or fire in our metaphors to play with. This is just AI slop. So that is tough. In this case, clearly, there's a vulnerability, but it's the idea of when can this get fixed, and are we going to fork this? This is not an abandoned project, but where is OpenSSF to perhaps help with this? They are someone who out there helping open source community with fuzzing, with investing in patching, because a lot of these open source projects, they don't need a lot more help to point out where all the flaws are. They need a lot more help to fix the flaws that exist, in addition to doing things like setting up fuzzing to find those types of flaws. So,
well, and the last thing I want to say about that is that Voyager is supported by DigitalOcean, right? So whose responsibility is it? Is it Voyager's or is it DigitalOcean? And if you look at the commit history too, the last commit that I'm seeing is 4 months ago, but prior to that, it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, which brings up the interesting question of, if you are using packages in your applications, how recent do you want them to be? When do you need to have the last commit by, right? Do you need it to be actively maintained within the last 6 months, within the last 2 years? What does that mean, right? Should you rely on an external auditing firm like the OpenSSF, or do you really need to do due diligence, and how do you fit that into all the other stuff you have to do?
We're just going to let that settle for a little bit while people go and look up how old a bunch of their packages are and whether they've been abandoned or not maintained. I will say, since we're on the topic of web application hacking, a quick reminder is that Portswigger and company has they will be releasing their top 10 web hacking techniques for 2024 tomorrow. So unfortunately, as we're recording this, we're one day early, but I will highlight that there's a really cool, the Icon V, and was one of my favorite ones. And actually, it's related to PHP. It was the Icon V set the char set to RCE, exploiting the glibc to hack the PHP engine. So that's the name of the article that I really enjoyed. We actually covered it back in 2024, but it was one of those things that, for me, showed a persistence of research. Some fuzzing found a vuln in glibc that was ancient, decade plus old. And then they went through the effort of trying to figure out, it looks really hard to exploit. There's not really places there that we found exploit paths, except this one way of how PHP filters are set up. And then they chained a whole bunch of filters, exploited this vulnerability, got an RCE. And for me, it was just a great way to learn about something PHP related that I wasn't familiar with, in the sense of chaining these PHP filters. And it was just one of those, that combination of wonderful write-up and old bug that hadn't been found that now has an exploit. So I wanted to do a quick FYI on that, and then maybe squeeze in, since we have a little bit of time, there was this really fun article I found that was a quote, a tiny Linux kernel tweak with massive implications for data center efficiency. And this is from linuxsecurity.com. And what was cool about it, it's something like 30 lines of code, but it shows that it could improve network throughput and the CPU processing for network events that would improve energy efficiency. And it was neat because it's the type of thing that, yes, this is 30 lines or so of code change, but this was several months of research, of evaluation, of figuring out, does this work? Does this, and is this developer friendly, and what kind of impact does this have on developers? And the reason I wanted to pull that up is there's a little bit of a callback to both OCSP and the OAuth 2.0 discussions we had. A lot of them speak to, okay, we have some RFCs. How developer friendly were these RFCs? How developer friendly was the security guidance within them? And even just using these types of features, did developers want to use them? Clearly, the answer was no. In OCSP, the answer was yes, but it's complicated and tough to use on the side of OAuth 2.0. So, Kira, I just wanted to point that out, that it buries the lead if we just say 30 lines or so of code changes, but several months of developer experience consideration. So that is how I would love to end for my soapboxing of the day. Thank you both for your patience through this. But any final words from you, Akira and Kalyani, on either this article or something else we talked about already today?
I mean, eco-friendly computing is a cool thought, right? I mean, AI takes so much energy to power its systems. Cryptography takes a lot of energy to power its systems, and I think that it's our responsibility as technologists to try to do this in the most eco-friendly way possible. So I remember hearing about this and just being really excited about that aspect.
Any final thoughts from you, Kalyani? Any parting words?
I feel like we spoke a lot about threat modeling today. And I am going through all of these articles, like now that we're seeing more RFCs and security. I like the trend where this is going. And I'm looking forward to actually seeing more practical threat modeling examples throughout the industry.
Yes, and thank you for highlighting that, because one of the things I'm hoping to do over 2025 is to pull out more, have more discussions on RFCs like this and talk about what were the design successes and what were the design failures as part of them, and how does that tie either into threat modeling, either into considering developer experience, user experience, etc. Because it's one thing just to repeat CIS's line for let's have secure design, secure default, but let's actually talk about what that looks like. And I want to say thank you very much to Akira and Kalyani for helping me figure out what some of that might look like for this segment. So thank you for that. Also want to thank everyone for joining us. If you want to go through your own OAuth Top 10 Pop quiz, let us know. Maybe we can repeat that. There's a bunch more entries in at least a few dozen OAuth Top 10 lists that we could go through. But that aside, please do remember to subscribe, share us on the socials, check out the show notes, and speaking of things to keep an eye on, check out Birdwatcher by Cat Temper. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.